mysterious and terrifying virus suddenly erupts on the streets of Tokyo. In just a few short months, more than 39 million Japanese people are infected by the virus, and the death toll soars to a horrifying tens of millions. The entire country falls into panic, the medical system teeters on the brink of collapse, social order disintegrates, and the once bustling Tokyo gradually turns into a dead, empty city. Faced with such a tragedy, other countries choose to watch coldly from the sidelines, unanimously calling it a curse of the devil. This is the 2009 Japanese disaster movie, Pandemic. The film does not have the earth-shattering special effects of typical disaster blockbusters, nor grand scenes. Yet it outlines a doomsday picture after an unknown virus invades Japan with a documentary-like touch. The trajectory of the virus spread, the details of epidemic prevention work, and even the various states of humanity in the disaster hide precise predictions of many scenes in real epidemics that occurred later. Just a short while ago, a patient with a high fever suddenly arrived at a hospital in Tokyo. After Dr. Matsuoka tested the patient, he didn't find anything abnormal and thought it was just a common cold and fever, so he told him to go home and drink plenty of hot water. But the next day, this patient and his wife were both infected and sent to the hospital. Strangely, the test the doctor did for him today was still negative, but his symptoms were much more severe than yesterday, with blood uncontrollably flowing from his nose and the corners of his eyes. Soon, his body began to convulse violently. Seeing this doctor, Ando hurried forward to control him, but the patient suddenly sat up and coughed a mouthful of blood onto his face. Ando didn't mind. He simply wiped it off and continued the rescue work. But at this point, the patient's organs had all failed, and there was no way to save him. Ando deduced that this person must have contracted some new type of infectious disease, so the hospital quickly sent personnel to carry out a large-scale disinfection operation. To prevent infection, all medical staff took drugs for prevention. After 2 hours of rescue attempts, the man eventually died in the hospital bed. Not far away, the patient's wife, Mami, watched this scene with overwhelming grief. She excitedly questioned the doctor why her husband died when it was clearly just a simple cold and fever. Matsuoka was also full of self-blame at this time, his heart filled with regret and doubt. A healthy person died after treatment failed in just one short day. The danger of this unknown disease far exceeded his expectations. However, what he didn't know was that this was just the beginning of the disaster, and a more terrible storm was quietly brewing. Meanwhile, similar symptoms soon appeared elsewhere in Tokyo. Subway staff and bus passengers all bled from their 7 orifices due to infection. The hospital was soon surrounded by feverish patients and the infected doctor. Ando fell to the ground at this time. Matsuoka watched his colleague, who had fought side by side with him in the past, fall down. He was burning with anxiety, but helpless. He could only watch helplessly as Ando's body gradually collapsed, eventually dying in the line of duty, becoming the first medical staff member to sacrifice himself in this epidemic. Ando's death caused panic to start spreading in the hospital. The medical staff realized that this was not an ordinary illness, but a highly contagious and deadly virus. But they didn't know the transmission route of the virus, nor did they have protection experience. So they could only stick to their posts in fear. The abnormal situation in the hospital quickly attracted the attention of the Japanese government. The lethality and contagiousness of the virus made everyone vigilant. Compared to the bird flu that occurred in the Philippines last year, this mutated virus is stronger. If not controlled in time, the consequences will be unimaginable. Currently, they have a stockpile of vaccines for 30 million people against ordinary influenza, but they are not sure if it is effective against the mutated virus. And to develop a vaccine suitable for this germ, it will take another 6 months. At the same time, a poultry farm in the suburbs of Tokyo suddenly detected the bird flu virus, and thousands of chickens in the farm died inexplicably. According to the staff's tests, not only the dead chickens but also the living chickens all showed a positive reaction. Therefore, the remaining tens of thousands of chickens were all forcibly culled, and the chicken farm suffered heavy losses instantly. Once the news spread, the public immediately linked the chicken farm to this unknown epidemic, believing that bird flu was the source of the virus. The chicken farm owner Kamakura and his family instantly fell into desperation. Neighbors avoided them like the plague, and some even smashed their windows and called to insult them. Kamakura's daughter Akane was also excluded and isolated by classmates at school, who said her father was a virus spreader. The huge pressure of public opinion and discrimination pushed Kamakura to the brink of collapse. Finally, he chose to commit suicide, ending this undeserved disaster in an extreme way. But Kamakura's death did not bring the truth. Instead, it made the epidemic more out of control. More and more critically ill patients appeared in the hospital, and the WHO immediately sent virology expert Aiko to Japan to guide epidemic prevention work and curb the spread of the epidemic. When Aiko appeared in the hospital wearing a professional protective suit, Matsuoka was instantly stunned. The female expert with a resolute gaze and vigorous style in front of him was actually his lover from many years ago. Back then, they had a disagreement because Aiko went abroad to work and finally broke up helplessly. Reuniting after many years, it turned out to be in such a critical scenario. Past feelings intertwined with the current crisis, making their moods particularly complicated. Meeting again now, Aiko directly asked Matsuoka to be her assistant. After preliminary judgment, she immediately made a shocking decision, which was to implement a comprehensive quarantine on the entire hospital building, forbidding anyone from entering or leaving, and no longer accepting patients with general illnesses. Subsequently, she arranged for medical staff to understand the whereabouts of each patient. But Mommy, who was the first to be sent to the hospital, had just lost her husband and didn't want to talk to anyone at all. So they went to the chicken farm to check the situation. At this time, the chicken farm had been cleaned up. After searching around, they didn't get any useful clues. But it was certain that the chicken farm owner and his daughter were not infected. This could rule out the chicken farm as the outbreak point. On the 5th day of the virus outbreak, the number of confirmed diagnoses had reached more than 23,000. The hospital was packed with infected patients, and even the temporarily set up tents could only admit critically ill patients. Some with milder symptoms were told to go home and isolate themselves. The situation was getting more and more serious, and medical staff were severely scarce. Aiko had to hold an emergency general meeting, calling on everyone to become full-time infectious disease personnel to assist her. This job not only requires bearing great pressure mentally and physically, but also having the courage to face the danger of being infected at any time. What was gratifying was that after a brief hesitation, everyone raised their hands to join, and no one chose to back down. To control the epidemic, the Japanese government had to take tough measures to seal off the epidemic area and send the self-defense forces to patrol the streets, arrest infected people who concealed their illness, and even suppress riots caused by panic. At this time, the uninfected people all wanted to flee the epidemic area. Some people, in order to escape, ignored the staff's obstruction and rushed through the isolation barriers. And as the first car forced its way through the checkpoint, the people behind also fled one after another. Those who couldn't escape gathered in shopping malls, frantically snatching living supplies. Countries around the world also issued notices to stay away from Japan and no longer accepted anyone returning from Japan. The World Health Organization announced that this was a completely unknown virus that could be transmitted through droplets and air. So the previous bird flu in the suburbs of Tokyo had nothing to do with this virus. Seeing that even the WHO didn't know what this virus was, let alone the treatment method, some doctors immediately lost their fighting spirit, scolding the WHO for being useless. After other countries learned the news, they did not extend a helping hand to them either. They all unanimously claimed that this was them being cursed by the devil. On the 22nd day of the outbreak, the number of infections in Japan had reached 800,000, with 420,000 deaths. Transportation systems across the country began to shut down, and social order had already collapsed. Just then, Mami, the wife of the first deceased patient, had improved. She sneaked out of the hospital and went home while the doctors weren't paying attention. Aiko felt that this woman must be hiding something, so she went to Mami's house with Matsuoka to search. Before long, they finally found her at Mami's home. Mami also slowly told them the truth of the matter. It turned out that her father, Tachibana, had worked as a doctor in a small country in Southeast Asia and had returned once during the new year. At that time, his body had already shown abnormalities. He stayed at home for one night and hurriedly returned to Southeast Asia. Since then, Mami could no longer contact her father. Now it seems that this virus was very likely brought by Mami's father. Aiko told the WHO about the situation she learned. To find the source of the virus as soon as possible, the WHO sent people to take Matsuoka and an old professor to the place where Mami's father worked. Although they did not see Tachibana here, Matsuoka found a diary he wrote on the computer. It said that he had been to a nearby small island, and the people on the island had contracted an unknown flu. That place was very likely the source of the virus, so they followed the clues all the way to the island. Abandoned houses and scattered corpses could be seen everywhere here, and the air was filled with the smell of decay, which made people shudder. After some searching, Matsuoka found that there were still survivors on the island, but these people also seemed to be infected with the virus. They were like demons in hell, frantically lunging at Matsuoka seeking help. Seeing this, Matsuoka had to get up and run. When he ran outside, he saw a young man taking care of other patients, but he didn't look very healthy either. Sure enough, not long after, he fell to the ground. Before dying, he handed the notebook left by Tachibana to the professor. Subsequently, WHO personnel arrived and carried out rescue operations there. Matsuoka prepared to return to Japan with the notebook and samples, while the professor chose to stay, wanting to continue looking for the source of the virus. On the boat back, Matsuoka checked the contents of the notebook, which clearly recorded the origin of the virus. It turned out that in order to build a breeding farm on the island these years, all the surrounding forests were cut down. To make a living, the villagers had to go deep into the mountains and old forests to log. A man accidentally came into contact with a bat carrying the virus and then ran home in a panic. Afterward, symptoms such as high fever and coughing up blood followed immediately, and he finally died bleeding from his 7 orifices in pain. And the neighbors, relatives, and friends who had contact with him were also infected and died one after another. The originally lively village was soon shrouded in the shadow of death. To conceal the facts, the breeding farm actually set fire to the entire village and all the boats, burning them to ashes. The villagers on the island also completely lost contact with the outside world. Shortly after, an infected girl in the village met Tachibana, who came to practice medicine nearby. Hearing about the tragic state of the village, he ignored his own safety and went to the epidemic area alone to treat patients. But he was also unfortunately infected while caring for patients, and his body grew weaker day by day. While his consciousness was still clear, Tachibana traveled back to Japan to visit his daughter. However, just as he got off the car, he felt unwell and vomited blood all over the ground at the station. A passenger was accidentally infected while helping him up, and the conductor at the station was also infected while cleaning up the blood at the scene. Tachibana knew his physical condition was abnormal, so he only spent a short night with his daughter and hurriedly returned. And he died tragically on the island after returning. But it was this short 24-hour contact that the virus had quietly planted fatal seeds in Japan. On the other side, the professor finally found the source of the virus in a cave. All of this was actually caused by bats. However, before the professor had time to be happy, he was also infected by the virus and died on the island. The virus continued to spread rapidly in Japan. Medical resources were completely in emergency. Hospital beds were full, and severe treatment equipment such as ventilators were in short supply. To ensure medical supplies went to patients who still had a chance of recovery, Aiko forcibly removed the ventilators from some patients who could no longer be cured. She knew that in the current situation, such sacrifices had to be made. The doctors couldn't understand Aiko's behavior, but she didn't care about being opposed. As the respirators were pulled out, patients died one after another. And the patients who got the respirators were not saved. These few deaths became the last straw that broke the camel's back, and the doctors in the hospital also began to lose their fighting spirit. After all, a doctor's mission is to save people, but their behavior just now was undoubtedly murder. As Matsuoka brought the samples back to Japan, they finally isolated the virus after many days of research. Next, they would immediately launch vaccine development. It would take at least half a year to achieve mass production. Now, the number of infected people in Japan has reached 5 million, and the death toll is about 900,000. Wrapped corpses are placed everywhere. The virus has infected almost 90% of the people in Japan, and a breath of death hangs over the city. The scene on the streets of Tokyo is like doomsday. During this period, Aiko and Matsuoka always stuck to the front line of the anti-epidemic fight. In the process of fighting side by side, they gradually resolved the estrangement of the past and re-recognized each other. However, Aiko was also unfortunately infected with the virus. She knew she couldn't go back, so she continued to take care of patients at a nearby isolation point. But not long after, her condition worsened, and she finally fell weakly in front of the hospital bed. On the other side, Akane from the chicken farm was also infected with the virus. Back then, her father was wrongfully blamed by everyone and took his own life. Now, the doctors absolutely cannot let anything happen to her. Just as Matsuoka is performing emergency treatment on Akane, he suddenly receives a video call from Aiko. She tells Matsuoka that she is preparing to attempt a new treatment method, injecting the serum of a survivor into the patient's body. This method was opposed in Europe, believing that its safety and effectiveness could not be guaranteed. But Aiko remembered that doctors in Zaire had used this method at critical moments, and there were many successful cases. Now she had no retreat. She wanted to use her own body for the experiment. If successful, more people could be saved. Just then, Akane's condition also began to deteriorate. To save her life, Matsuoka had to adopt Aiko's proposal. Extract the serum of a healed patient with the same blood type as Akane and treat her. Fortunately, shortly after the serum injection, Akane's body temperature gradually dropped. The symptom of coughing up blood was alleviated, and her consciousness slowly became clear. In the end, she miraculously escaped danger. However, Aiko, who also experimented, failed regrettably and left them forever.
Aiko.
Half a year later, the vaccine to restrain the virus was finally developed. the epidemic was gradually brought under control, and the once stagnant city slowly regained its vitality. However, this epidemic made Japan pay a painful price. 39. 5 million people infected, 11. 2 million dead. More than 1/10 of the population died in the disaster.